Legions was a Japanese-language trading card game released by Flip-Flops, with the first starter set releasing June the 2nd of 2017, and its fourth and final booster set released in April of 2019. The game sputtered to an end with a final farewell tournament scheduled for July of 2020, which never happened, because it was 2020. Flip-Flops has published games in the past like the deck builder Heart of Crown, and manga series like Darwin's Game.
なんだこれ無料ゲーム
But if you're like me, the art style of Legions is immediately familiar as belonging to Yuji Himukai, the main artist of the Etrian Odyssey series of video games. As a fan of Etrian Odyssey, this piqued my interest, but what really convinced me to actually try playing the game and going through the hassle of translating the rules and card effects is that in Legions, creatures don't die when they are killed. Instead, they're sent to a timeline, where you can play them again once a specified number of turns have passed. With every defeated unit and every spell cast automatically on a cooldown before they can be used again, Legions is a game with a strong hook and a fairly unique card flow and tempo. To play Legions, you have a 40-card deck with a 3 of limit and 1 master card. You set your master on the field in front of you on its normal side, then you shuffle your deck and draw 5 cards. Finally, set your life to 20, place 5 cores on your master, and then the player going second moves 1 core from their master to their timeline into Wait Zone 3. Turns begin by activating all of your exhausted minions, masters, and lords. Next is a core phase. You start by moving 1 core from your master to an active core zone, as well as any cores from your exhausted core zone also return to the active core zone. Next, you draw 1 card from your deck, and you have the option of discarding 1 card from your hand to then draw another. From there, your main phase begins, and like most main phases, you can activate effects and play out cards from your hand. Playing out cards in Legions is a little bit different than other trading card games in that you must first unlock them. You unlock a card by paying its cost in cores, moving that many cores from your active core zone to the exhausted core zone. 2 color cards must match your master's colors, and if a single color card doesn't match one of your master's colors, you're still able to play it, but you must pay an additional 1 core cost to unlock it. Once a card is unlocked, they can then be played out to the field or placed into your standby. The standby is an area behind your main field of play that can hold up to 2 cards at once, and during your main phase you can deploy units and activate spells from the standby for no cost. Minions are placed in one of 3 zones in front of your master, and spells apply their effect and are then placed directly into the timeline in the zone noted on the bottom of the card. There are a few additional actions you can take during your main phase. You can exhaust an active unit to move it to another lane. You can place any of your active minions or lords, or any cards in your standby, into the trash if you need to clear a little bit of space on your field. Finally, you are able to attack. Units in Legions have summoning sickness, so they can't take any actions requiring exhausting them, like attacking, changing lanes, or activating fatigue abilities, so we'll have to wait until our next turn to see how combat works. Once you end your turn, all damage is removed from all units, and all cards in your timeline move down 1 zone. Cards that are in Zone 1 during this stage are instead moved into the standby, and if you end up with more cards moving to standby than you have available space in the standby, you must then discard cards until you're back down to the 2-card limit in the standby area. Cards in your standby are then ready to be played out on your next turn, and remember that playing cards out from the standby does not involve paying any additional costs. You can simply play them straight out for free. Now that we are at the point where we have a unit that is not summoning sick, we can go ahead and see how attacking works. You start by exhausting the attacker and selecting your attack target. Note that your master is sometimes able to attack, and they are not exhausted when they attack. When you're selecting a target, you can target an opposing minion in the same lane or an adjacent lane, or if there are no minions in the attacker's lane, you are able to attack the opponent's lord or master directly. Once targets are selected, the attacker and their attack target battle, dealing damage equal to their attack to the HP of their opponent. Units with damage that is equal or more than their HP are defeated and break. Attacks on the master reduce their life points. Finally, at the end of combat, broken minions are moved into the timeline, and broken lords move their cores over to their master and are then discarded into the trash. The final rule to address is what happens when you move your last core off of your master during your core phase. When this happens, the master transforms and it gains a couple of new abilities. And note that because the second turn player begins play with a core in their timeline instead of on their master, the second turn player actually transforms first. Transformed masters can rest to give one of their units Assault, which lets a unit you just played ignore Summoning Sickness and attack immediately, or they can alternately rest to put a new core on themselves. Like before, this core will move to your active core zone at the start of your next turn. Additionally, transformed masters are now able to play out Lords and Arts. Arts are powerful spells that are placed into the trash when they resolve instead of going to the timeline. Lords are powerful units that are placed in a special Lord zone beside your master, and like your master, this is considered part of the center zone, so they are able to attack any lane on the field. Lords also have a secondary cost as well. You must place that many exhausted cores onto the Lord while they remain in play. Once the Lord is defeated, they are placed into the trash, not the timeline, and then the retained cores return to your master, again returning into your active core area once per turn at the start of the turn as normal. Play will continue back and forth until one player wins. There's the usual win con of reducing your opponent's life to 0, or if your opponent is attempting to draw from an empty deck, but you can also win the game by ending the turn with 12 or more total resources between your master and your core zones. So if that's how to play, does it all actually work? Overall, yes. The game is a good mix of a functional lane battler system, a unique hook and selling point with its timeline, and a charming, if occasionally lewd, visual aesthetic. While I was still learning the rules, my biggest concern with a system like this was the danger of repetitive gameplay, where the same cards keep getting played again and again until eventually one player wins. In actual gameplay, though, this is definitely not an issue. The steady escalation of power through the cost curve means that you'll want to be adding new cards to the field as often as possible. While the cards moving through your timeline are great for utility effects and filling in the gaps in your game plan and making sure you're able to fill in your field as consistently as possible, the game doesn't really let you build an entire game plan around just rotating through the same cards again and again. If nothing else, Red's ability to add wait time to cards makes it dangerous to rely too heavily on trying to cycle cards through your timeline. That being said, the timeline does help a lot with making sure that you're rarely left with turns with nothing to do, and personally, I find there are a few things more frustrating in a game than being stuck with nothing to do, so on the whole, I've really enjoyed Legion's rule system and the style of gameplay that it is promoting. Given the steady supply of reused cards from the timeline, you might expect this to be a game with very attritional and grindy gameplay, but it's actually very much the opposite. Legions is a very tempo-oriented game. That is partially because card advantage is less important. With a steady feed of cards coming from the timeline and a very small field size to manage, it is very difficult to stall out an opposing attack by starving them of cards completely. The other half of it is that the combat system makes it very difficult to stabilize. Because you're able to attack adjacent lanes as well as the one directly in front of you, each defender has to survive multiple attacks in order to fully block their lane. And late game, your master is always giving you access to at least one haste unit per turn. All of which combines to mean that it's very easy to open lanes and force through at least a little damage every turn, and almost impossible to fully block all damage in a given turn. If you pass the turn to the opponent on 1 or 2 life, you will not survive. I haven't been able to play a whole lot past the 2 starters, but while lane battler card systems tend towards more tempo-based gameplay out of the box, Legions feels like it's one of the more extreme examples. That's definitely not a bad thing, it's more just a matter of player preference, but from a game design perspective, I suspect that makes it tricky in a way that might not immediately be obvious. Between tight tempo-based gameplay, card reuse from the timeline, letting your strongest cards appear multiple times per game, and a sort of turn draw that gives you a lot of power to dig for specific cards, navigating card balance for this game feels like it would be especially unforgiving. Life gain and effect design can help with slowing the tempo, and Lords and Arts are powerful effects that are kept away from the timeline, but this still feels like the margin of error for game balance is a little bit tighter than in most other TCG systems. This is purely based on first impressions. I haven't actually dived into the historical meta of the game, so I'm curious if this actually ended up being an issue. And if anyone in the competitive scene knows what it was like, please let me know in the comments below. I am actually very curious. There are a few more neat things going on with Legions that are worth touching on here. For one, between the timeline and the standby, Legions has a lot more going on in its physical play space than most other trading card games, and the game has been quite clever about managing how it uses its table space. While most modern games have settled into using cards for resources, and also generally adapted some kind of shield life system, this would take up a lot of extra space on the more complex board of Legions, so they've wisely decided to use tokens for resources and a life point total rather than shields. Anyone designing their own game should be aware of just how much space all of the cards in various card zones are taking up, and Legions shows that there's a lot you can do to add space for more zones without making the play area a complete hopeless mess. Legions also includes a QR codes on all of their cards, linking to the card encyclopedia for oracle text and rule clarification. And while a few games since have hopped onto that bandwagon, Legions is the first game I remember ever seeing having this feature, which is kind of neat and also well integrated into the card frame, but given the card encyclopedia was the first part of the website to shut down, I'm not really sold on QR codes taking up valuable real estate on card faces when searching the card's name in a search engine works just as well. Legions also had a slower than usual schedule for set releases, barely managing one set a year. Set 1 released on June of 2017, and then just a little bit longer than normal for TCG releases, Set 2 released in November of the same year. From there were a few new starters rolled out in May of 2018, and then the next set was almost a year after Set 2, falling in at August of 2018. The final set was April of 2019. Again, a substantial delay between the third set and the fourth set compared to other TCG releases, which generally put out 4 boosters per year. Overall, this feels like a schedule that is much more in line with an expanding board game rather than a traditional TCG. From my own perspective, I'd like to believe that there is room for slower trading card games like this compared to the more standard schedule of 4 to 6 sets per year that most TCGs have settled into. But it's also possible that the slower release schedule makes it more difficult for the game to find and hold onto a wide enough audience to survive. TCGs are very difficult games to keep alive, and they depend on a very high level of player investment. Legions is something of a special game for me, from noticing it for its Etrian Odyssey style art and the unique gameplay gimmick of the timeline. It's been rattling around in the back of my mind for about 8 years now. As the game began winding down, I noticed that there was an even dozen starter decks showing available on Amazon.jp. It looked like somebody had found a box of product somewhere, and I figured that now was the time to order if I ever wanted to have a chance to try the game. Amazon took 8 months to ship that order, and once a month without fail, they would send an email asking me if I wanted to cancel. Stubbornly, I refused to answer. Finally, I guess they found the misplaced box and the game arrived. The box a little bit smushed, but with the cards otherwise in perfect shape. Then I left it in that box until after my trip to Japan in 2024, when I finally mustered the motivation to translate the rules and card effects, only to realize afterwards that I already had a translated rules sheet that I had downloaded years earlier. Now, making this video in 2026, there's not much of the game left in the wild, and I kind of feel like I missed out. In many ways, we're in a TCG golden age right now. There are dozens of great games to choose from. However, it's also hard to get away from the fact that most of the games doing well right now are kind of familiar. Maybe this is what's needed to survive in the modern trading card game landscape, but Legions reminds me when TCGs were just a little more mysterious. When your reaction to opening a pack wasn't, "Heck yeah, that's Camille, I know that guy," but you wouldn't be quite sure what you'd find. It might be fan service, or ninjas, or fan service ninjas, or a guy in a plague mask riding a motorcycle. Legion's art and characters have a lot of charm, and its core gameplay is legitimately excellent. It's a game I'll definitely be keeping near the top of my TCG box for a good long while to come. And again, Legion seems to be almost custom made to appeal to what I love in games. It is a game with high consistency, narrow fields of play, and very tight and technical gameplay. Let me know what you think of the game in the comments below, and have a fantastic day.